Thank you all for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn webinar. My name is Matt Gasecki, and I am the Community Outreach and Education Coordinator for NAMI Greater Cleveland. And I am delighted to be joined by Larissa Malcolm and Nikki Price, who will be offering two different perspectives on the theme of redefining normal, supporting employee wellness through COVID transitions. We will be examining this topic from a clinical side and from a human resources side as well. And my hope is that this program, although we do not offer CEUs, my hope is that this program will be edifying for all of you in some way. With that in mind, I'll just do a very brief introduction to NAMI Greater Cleveland for all of you. Some of you may be very familiar with our programs. Some of you, this may be your first time. So NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and NAMI Greater Cleveland is the local affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness that serves Cuyahoga County. NAMI was started in the 1970s by a group of mothers of children with mental illness who were dissatisfied with the lack of robust support and education in their communities for people living with mental illness and their families. So today, NAMI now is represented in all 50 states. It's the largest grassroots mental health organization of its kind. And our mission is focused on support, education, information, and referral, and advocacy for individuals with mental illness and their families. We have support groups, some of which are for people with mental illness, some of which are for their families. We offer 8-week courses, peer-to-peer and family-to-family, to help people move through a diagnosis and learn what wellness looks like. We have occasional community education offerings like this that are open to the public. We have a helpline that is staffed Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. that is available to the community as a helpline resource for referral to resources and services in the community. And we also support advocacy in the sense of raising awareness about mental illness, reducing the stigma around mental illness, and engaging in work that promotes more humane mental health treatment options and more funding for mental health treatment. So that is the work of NAMI in a nutshell. There will be time at the end of this presentation for Q&A, but I see looks like there's a little over 20 folks on the call today. So with that in mind, I think my preference would be if you have a question during the presentation, just drop it in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and will, based on the question, I may choose to gently interrupt one of our presenters and offer the question if it's something that should be answered in the moment. Otherwise, we can address our questions at the end. We'll be starting with Larissa, who will talk about the clinical side of this presentation, and then we'll be moving to Nikki. Maybe before you start presenting, Larissa, I can ask you and Nikki to both just very briefly introduce yourselves and share whatever you feel like you'd like our audience to know about you. And then after that, we will move into Larissa's side of the presentation first. So now I invite you, Larissa and Nikki, to just briefly introduce yourselves.
All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Larissa Malcolm, and I have a private practice in Cleveland. I do telehealth exclusively. It's called Flourishing Focus. Before that, I worked for nonprofits for most of my career. Last year, I was working in a nursing home providing therapy when I got COVID, and that was the impetus for me to start my own private practice and stay home. So that's how I ended up here. And I give you guys a warning, the air does not come up to this room as well as it should. I have the ceiling fan on. Hopefully it's not too loud. And hopefully I won't be drenched in sweat and glasses foggy before this is over. Just a warning, so you know, if I start to melt, that's why. And I'll let Nikki introduce herself now.
Thanks, Larissa. I'm very happy to be with you all today. I'm Nikki Price. My day job is I'm Director of Talent Management at First Energy. So, probably familiar with First Energy, a regional utility provider. The reason I'm involved in today's webinar is I'm recently also an appointed board member to NAMI of Greater Cleveland. So thrilled to be able to support this cause and really share my experience from an HR perspective as it relates to how organizations are handling COVID. So very happy to be with you all today.
Thank you both so much. So I believe without further ado, I will hand things over to Larissa.
All right. So the presentation today is titled Redefining Normal, Supporting Employee Wellness Through COVID Transitions. So what a year have we had, or a year and a half, or however long this has been. Seems like forever, and it seems like yesterday. Last March, we thought we were maybe going home for 2 weeks, and here we are in the end of July towards August, now kind of talking about how are we going to transition back? What is normal going to look like? And what does that mean for all of us? So I want to start off by talking about collective trauma. And maybe you've heard this term on the news or haven't, or it's new to you. So collective trauma is after a traumatic event. People have an increased sense of fear. They have an increased sense of vulnerability. And this is being felt on a community level. So people may start to question our identities, or what does the future of society look like as a whole? The nature of collective trauma, it can be challenging to draw clear conclusions about what the long-term effects are going to be on all of us. And not all traumas are felt equally, and they're not all felt by, equally. So I want to see if I can remember this. Something, we're all in the storm, but we're not all in kind of the same boat. So while my experience looks like my experience, your experience looks like your experience, we're all going through trauma collectively, and some aspects are similar, some aspects are different. This pandemic is causing collective trauma. Other events that cause collective trauma are wars, political unrest, natural disasters. So it's something that is felt as a whole. So when each group is fighting, we're fighting the same fears and anxieties in some way. Traumas could impact each group differently. We're fighting the same battle. We don't have the same weapons to fight back. And it's compounded by the buildup of multiple traumas. So we've been isolated physically and socially. We have potentially have a fear of illness. The isolation and quarantine can lead to severe adverse psychological effects on people in different ways. So some can have confusion or anger. Some may even be experiencing PTSD. Our lives have been disrupted. The effects of social isolation on mental health are severe. So there's been a lot of talk about an eventual mental health crisis, as if we're not already in one even before this happened. There's not enough providers out there for the need, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So one thing for all of us, while we're coping with all of the stress, remember that we're not alone. Use our own strategies to cope with stress. One big thing that people can do is step away from the news and social media. Instead, take our own time to acknowledge positive things in our lives. Keeping our whole body as healthy as we can help to impact our mental health. Our brain is part of our body. And when our body is working better, our brain works better. So trying to get enough sleep, exercising, eating well, finding things that we enjoy doing, avoiding excessive alcohol use and substance uses, find things that make us happy, talk to others, and engage with the community as much as we can. So we're talking about returning to work. I found this study that Paychex put out recently, it was in 2021, this year. 40% of employees have experienced mental health, performance, or attitude problems at work since the pandemic began. If you can see the stats on there, 31% increased anxiety, 24% decreased enthusiasm, 22% decreased motivation, 21% report reduced focus, 20% increased depression, and 16% report decreased teamwork. Another study that I found by PricewaterhouseCoopers recently said a third of the people that were questioned want to continue working from home full-time. And Interestingly, executives, very few were prepared to let go of their office space. Employees believe that working from home has worked for them and their company, and bosses have believed that working in the office is good for company culture. Employers surveyed their employees, employers surveys their employees that said that employees have been more productive working from home and believe it's important to return to the office so they can collaborate more. And the least experienced employees reported that their working at home was not as productive. But one thing that's for certain is our office life is not going to be the same. So I found a term called reentry anxiety, and that is apprehension about returning to the workplace. Some people are worried about their safety. They're worried about leaving their house, unknowingly contracting COVID-19 or spreading it to others. And some are reporting that they're a little anxious about, or maybe not a little anxious about social interactions. You know, over the last year, we've had less opportunities to interact in person. So while we've been social distancing, we may have less practice how we meet people in person. Maybe looking people in the eyes is going to be a new thing again. And engaging in chit chat is something that we haven't been doing as much. So if you're somebody that is getting ready to return to an office, here's a couple of things you can possibly do to get ready to go back to an office space. Mentally walking through scenarios, getting ready, kind of prepare yourself for what might happen and how would you respond. Doing dry runs if you can. If you get an opportunity to go back to your workspace, maybe tidying it up if you haven't been there in a year and a half and gonna get caught in the dust, I can only imagine. Maybe bringing in a plant, greening up your workspace it helps. And one thing that he said, I thought this was interesting. This was in some data, was giving your wardrobe a makeover. So if you can do that, get ready. I guess I like going back to school on the first day, you have a new outfit to wear. And another important thing, a really important thing, is establishing a sleep schedule. If you haven't been going to an office, if you were, somebody that got sent home and your sleep schedule is different, returning to establishing a sleep schedule is important. So some people are reporting mistrust or safety concerns. It's important, if you're feeling that way, to communicate those concerns. And if you're going to be managing people that might be feeling that way, talking to them about them. What are people's worries about this new normal that we're going to embark upon? If you're someone who's worried about being close to others as far as the spread of COVID-19, continue practicing safe social distancing. Be honest with yourself about how you're feeling. And again, reach out for help. So workplace mental health matters. Our brains are just as crucial to our well-being, especially considering that mental illness can have impacts on our physical health as well. Our mental challenges can increase blood pressure, hormonal imbalances, and increased risk of cancer. When an employee is suffering, so does their work. Depression has become the leading cause of disability across the globe. And it's estimated that 172 million workdays are lost due to depression each year. Stress and anxiety, other mental health issues compound this problem, leaving people less engaged, less focused, and less productive. So what are some things that we can do to help employees? According to that paycheck study again, employee mental health benefits that they found most helpful were the option to work from home, flexible schedules, regular check-ins, professional development plans, meaningful professional development plans, and programs that offer referrals for behavioral health or substance use disorders, responsive and confidential communication on HR-related questions, transactions, issues, or incidents. So the first step to beating stigma is to stop treating mental illness as taboo. So whether you read an article or watch a show or have a personal experience, talking about it openly without shame will help others realize they aren't alone. Another important thing is to be conscious of your language. What words we use, even just in general chit chat, can be stigmatizing. So we want to make sure that our culture is inclusive with our language and is kind. So, we're not using mental health diagnoses as jokes or even in just conscious. I know sometimes I struggle, to say, oh, that's just crazy. Well, that can be triggering for someone. That can be a word that can impact people. So being conscious about the language that you use. Encouraging equality between physical and mental illness. So treating it the same as opposed to, if someone is experiencing symptoms of mental illness, they may not be treated as equally as somebody who has a physical illness. Like if you have a major depressive disorder, you should be treated the same as if you have a physical health or a cancer or the flu or something. Keeping conversations going. So not just having this one time, we're going to talk about mental health today, but so it's a fluid, threaded throughout other conversations, not just a one-time thing. Workplace culture has to be nurtured, and that means you can't just mention mental health once and expect it to catch on. Finding multiple opportunities to incorporate it into your employee's day so it stays top of mind. Including all levels of staff in conversations. Culture starts at the top, and employees won't believe you genuinely care about their well-being unless every manager and every executive also demonstrates the importance of mental health. Encourage employees to take mental health days off. That might be something that would be new for businesses. I even know have working in the mental health field where that wasn't something that was allowed. You had to come in with a doctor's note if you missed so many days, or if you call in and people will give you all kinds of physical health symptoms. If we still require that, employees provide doctor's notes or a legitimate physical health reason to miss work, it might be time to stop that. Part of preventive health involves giving your mind and body a break every now and then. So allowing your staff to sometimes miss work in order to recharge can help them and help you stave off more serious issues down the road. Encouraging mental health employee resource groups. If you have employee resource groups for other identification, I can't think of the word, identification groups, or so having groups about mental health and not stigmatizing those groups, so that everyone is involved. People can come in and participate as allies, even or that thing. So pay attention and be ready to help. If you notice an employee is behaving differently, ask them if everything's okay. Even if they tell you they're fine, remind them that you're there to help and have access to resources. Mental illness is a serious issue, and it can be addressed in a way that makes people feel understood, appreciated, and hopeful. Always remember to leave employees feeling like they have a clear plan of action ahead, and that if they or their loved ones need time so that they can get well. Prioritizing confidentiality and anonymity is really important. Even though mental health might be normalized in your workplace, some people might still feel uncomfortable discussing it, particularly if they struggle with addiction or trauma or suicidal thoughts. Reassure staff that their privacy is a top concern and prove it so that their use of mental health resources can never be monitored or tracked. Provide training. And that's where NAMI can come in. If you have a specific training need that you would like to see addressed, you can talk to Matt. He can help identify someone who is appropriate, who can provide that training for your staff. That's another part of normalizing things. But there's mental health first aid, there's other groups. So providing training is essential. And it's a great way to show the employees that you care. It's also a great way to know more, to learn more about the topics. Designing a mentally healthy workspace. It's important for employees to feel energized and uplifted by their work environment. Productivity, engagement, and overall wellness increase when people feel comfortable in workspaces with natural lighting, plants, and other positive features. I can give you a personal example of this. I worked in a space once where I had an office that was it was like a closet. It didn't have a window. Everything was gray. And I was really feeling depressed. I couldn't continue to work there. That was a reason, a high up reason that I left that position. I couldn't stay in that space. It was not good for me to be in this room with no windows, with fluorescent lighting, and everything was gray. Even though I tried to decorate it, it was just not a good space for me to be in. So keeping that in mind as you design your workspaces. Plants, natural lighting, those things are important for people to be more productive and stick with your company or agency or group. So employee assistance programs are vital and promote the availability of any EAP resources that you have. Multiple communication channels. Make sure that there's, not everybody reads all the emails. If they look like they're not, all staff emails, people might not read them. So use email, also use newsletters, use posters, use the company intranet, digital signs, announce in team meetings. Make sure that people know about the EAP and how to access it. Know the things that the program offers. So if you have an employee that you're going to suggest they go to EAP, know what's available there. And you can learn all about the modalities and tools that the provider uses when you can, to connect employees to the program. Some have text therapy offered, some have video counseling, digital behavioral health, if they have around the clock access or online self-care tools or resources. Know what's there. Ask the EAP that you work with about the online tools that they have, if they're available, the resources, if they have things that are focused on resilience, mindfulness, meditation, psychological first aid, and find out what kind of data they provide. Ask the vendor to provide data regarding the use of their programs, as well as the primary concerns and focus areas that your employees are using when they access it. It helps you to understand what employees are facing and proactively support managers working with their teams. Set a meeting with your EAP to strategize on any new program offerings that they may have available or trainings that they may have available, other tools that meet the needs of your employees. And you have a contract with the EAP, collaborate with them so that when you see things popping up, they can help you address those issues. And resources. Make sure that you have resources available to your employees and that they're relevant and up to date. So no matter how much information you have that you provide to them, it'll never be great, it'll never be good if it's outdated or irrelevant. It could even do harm. Audit your mental health resources to make sure they're accurate, up to date, and contain practical advice that employees can use to get better. Facilitate access to resources that are available. They won't get much information out of them if it's difficult to find these resources. So eliminate barriers to access by providing the content in different formats, audio, video, written. Our younger and even my age people like short videos, right? We're watching TikTok videos. So the quick snippets of stuff that people can access and be engaged and entertained are really valuable. Minimize the number of steps that it takes for people to find the resources and access them. And finally, here's some helpful web links that I found. This I think will be available to you. If not, we can get it. These are just links to OSHA has information about coronavirus, the EEOC, and what you should know about COVID. And then I found this resource on SHRM about returning to work. So that was it for the slideshow. I can end it, stop sharing my screen. Oh, I did something wrong. There.
Thank you, Larissa.
You're welcome.
We are back. Lots of really important information in there. I wish I had been taking notes. I should have been taking notes regarding what you had just said, Larissa. Yes, I can make these slides available to all of our attendees. I can send out a message afterwards so that you have access to those links. And I think that at this time, we will transition to Nikki's presentation. So Nikki, if you are there and ready to share your presentation, we can move in that direction. And Nikki, you're muted if you're there.
Okay. I think I went maybe a little fast. I talk fast. So, well, oh, there's Nikki.
Okay, bear with me a second. I've been having some computer issues the past couple of days, so I'm working on making sure everything is okay. Can you all see me?
Yes.
All right, now I'm going to work on sharing my screen here for a second. Oh, pardon me. Can you see the slides?
Yes, it's loading.
Okay.
Yes, we can see it. You just need to go into the slideshow view.
There we go. All right, so success.
Yes.
Minimize this, yes. Okay. So thank you. And I think, Larissa, everything that you shared, my intent as I thought about this presentation today was really to come at it through the view of an employer. And what are the things that we should be doing from an employer standpoint as we think about supporting employees through this next phase of COVID transition? I think people have been so anxious to get back to normal after the year and a half that we've experienced, right? Everyone was waiting for, first trying to figure out how do we navigate in a more virtual environment where it was possible, or how do we keep employees safe in the workplace given everything that had been going on, to frankly getting comfortable within that for a very extended period of time. And as we've waited for vaccinations to take hold and things to start shifting, how do we then start thinking about making our workplaces safer for employees, transitioning back to the workplace? And so my goal in the piece that I put together for everyone today was to be thinking about how do we approach this next phase of a transition in a way that is meaningful for the business to be able to continue operations as effectively as possible while still supporting employees as we start to transition back or not, in some cases not back, but to the next phase of what the new normal is going to look like. And so I think that, the most important piece of that is really to be thinking about, the next phase is really about requiring an understanding of where you're starting from. And I think my experience is that we have organizations that frankly are all over the curve, right? Some organizations who were never really able to exit the current, the workplace, that really required employees to continue to be working in the office or working together as essential employees, while still wanting to make sure the practices that were being put into place kept people safe. while others very quickly, as Larissa alluded to, had to transition out of the workplace and find a way to accommodate a large number of employees working virtually to protect people's and the community's health and safety. And then we have others who, now as organizations are thinking about, what are we going to do next? Are we going to go back fully in person? Are we working on having a plan in a timeline to transition back to a new normal? I won't even say back to normal, right? But a new normal. Or are you an organization that is still kind of waiting to see how things play out, particularly with all the information about the Delta variant, and is it safe to really be thinking about it? And I can speak from my organization standpoint. We shifted a significant portion of our workforce, almost half, to working virtually as a result of COVID. And we have continued to support employees working virtually because, quite frankly, the organization has found that employees remained as productive, if not more, when they were able to focus on doing their work and keeping themselves and their families safety. So we know that as we look at this next phase of transition, that we do have still a portion of our workforce who very much wants to come back to the workplace in a way that will allow people to stay safe, and perhaps because people found that they were able to be flexible and effective in this new work environment, that maybe we don't need to be in the office the whole time, that it can come back into more of a hybrid way of working. And what's that going to look like? So, my point is, as from an employer perspective, really understanding where your organization is at today and where do you want to move as we transition to this next phase, and is leadership aligned behind that? But more importantly, what's in the best interest of your employee base, and what do your employees want? And that's really the second piece of this, right? Is not only knowing where your organization is on the curve right now, but where are your employees? And I think Larissa spoke to that really articulately, right? Is my guess is your employees are going to have a range of experience and feelings about how things are evolving. Everything from employees who have really struggled with the social isolation of working from home or having to adapt to a new way of working. So they're anxious. You'll probably have a subset of employees who are anxious and wanting to get back in person as quickly as possible and things to return normal. I think we all appreciate, though, that, having made this transition from a work perspective, that we've had to ease it into a different way of working and really get comfortable with either finding out how to do our work differently and, accommodate people being in a more virtual environment, or frankly, having a mixed workforce where you have some people in person and, still facing all of the concerns and the exposure of working in a workplace and perhaps having contact to others. But overall, just finding a different way of, having eased into a different way of working, but are looking at, well, what's going to happen next as we transition to what's happening in the world? How do we think about what a new normal is going to look like? And what is that going to mean for me as an employee? So you have people kind of cautiously anticipating, perhaps even worrying or concerned about what's next and how am I going to accommodate making that transition, particularly for things like working parents who may have, not only dealing with themselves and their own personal concerns or fears related to the virus, but, how am I going to deal with what my children's needs are or my family's needs are? And as we transition back and think about how the Delta variant might accomplish things, what are the things that I need to be thinking about, that I'm thinking about as an employee, that I hope my employer is going to be empathetic about and help me navigate as we move through this next phase? And then frankly, we still have people who are very fearful, perhaps, of the idea of going back to the workplace, knowing that, some people have chosen perhaps not to get vaccinated. Some people have. What is that going to mean for my risk of exposure and potentially of either getting exposed or exposing other people in my life as a result of that? So point of this is just, as an employer, stepping back and recognizing, how am I going to help my organization, and more importantly, my employees who are so valuable, transition through this next phase? And I think it's really about, again, understanding then where you are on the curve and where your employees are. And so how do you do that? What I found really successful in our organization and the group of employees that has been working on this has really been excellent about checking in and asking employees how they're doing. And so, when I think about the infrastructure that FirstEnergy has established around dealing with COVID, even from the very beginning, we have a group of our senior leaders who come together as like a business continuity management planning group. And then there is a working team appointed by them representing different areas of our business, including HR, who come together to kind of think about the specifics and the tactics of how is our organization going to navigate how we're handling everything related to the pandemic. And that was dating way back to last March when things got bad, to the different iterations that we've seen over this last year and a half. And now as we think about transitioning back to the workplace, and quite honestly, from a FirstEnergy standpoint, we've said after Labor Day is when we will start transitioning back. There are, that group meets regularly to do check-in statuses to see, are we tracking towards moving that direction? And certainly with all of the media reflecting the changes with the Delta virus, there's some questions around, are we sure now is still the right time? And we have, quite honestly, employees and leaders on both sides of that fence that say, yes, we need to start tracking to move back as quickly as possible, and we want things to regain to more normalcy. But importantly, what we've also learned and said during this period of time is that because we've adapted in some segments of our workforce to a more virtual approach that seems to be working, can we establish a workplace moving forward that has more of a hybrid approach to working? And so we're trying to manage through all of those dynamics. But going back to the point of understanding where employees are on the learning curve, most importantly, what we've been working on during this period of time is finding mechanisms to pulse our employees regularly, to check in with them, to see how they are doing, both from a mental health standpoint of how are you managing through this period of time? What are you concerned about? How is it working from home, or whatever the workplace situation is that you're working within during this period of time? So we've done multiple formal surveys through this period. And as we start to think about transitioning back, continue to survey employees about what their specific concerns are and needs that will help the leadership make decision around both the timing and the how and what the new normal is going to look like. And I think Larissa said this is, beyond formal mechanisms for checking in with employees, making sure that your leaders are equipped and having ongoing check-in conversations with their employees is really critical, not just as it relates to dealing with COVID, but just in general. It's a good practice to be checking in with your employees to see how they're doing from a wellness standpoint. And employees aren't always going to tell, right? Employees aren't always going to feel comfortable talking about their personal well-being and mental health. But as Larissa said, it's important to really watch for signals. Are you seeing things related to how employees are performing, or how their attitude and the way that they're interacting with others? And as you see those signals, really having leaders who are empathetic and compassionate and equipped with being willing to observe those signals and ask employees about what they need and how they can best be supported, I think is really critical. So being able to provide that support and respond in a supportive way as you're getting feedback from employees is absolutely critical. And for some leaders, that doesn't come natural, right? It's something that takes prodding, takes reminders from those higher in the organization or from HR, frankly, to remind them that, as a leader, it's more than just in how employees are getting their jobs done. It's how employees are showing up in the workplace, and do they, are they being asked about the things that matter? Because when we show up to work as employees, we bring our whole selves, and we want employees want to work for employers who are concerned about them as a whole person, not just the person that they bring to the office during work hours. So as an organization, members of leaders in an organization, it's really important to, as you're getting feedback from your employees, understand their concerns and their personal limitations. I know from my experience working at First Energy, again, going back to that idea that we have employees all over the curve, right? You're going to have some employees who have really valid concerns and challenges that they will need to be able to make their life work in order to be able to remain productive for their employee. So, for example, as it relates to COVID, if you have an employee who is a caregiver, a parent or a guardian with children, certainly understanding the limitations that or concerns that those individuals may have as we learn about how schools are going to be operating next year, right? Or childcare situations. Being able to really understand and that employees are working through those issues concurrent with being concerned about how they get their job done, right? And so as employers, I think the other side of that, though, is we have businesses to run. It's really important that we are being consistent and equitable and fair in how we treat different employees. So, as we have employees that raise concerns, one of the things that we believe in my organization is engaging our employees to be part of the solution, to help us figure out how we will navigate those challenges. And I would say one of the big learnings that we've had within my organization during this experience is it's really forced our leaders to be thinking about how do we be more authentic with our employees, because this whole experience with the pandemic has been so new for all of us, and we're all kind of learning as we go. And so not having everything solved in every minute has allowed us to engage our employees in helping us think through what the challenges really are that people are facing day to day, and what solutions might be practical and helpful. And I think one of the things I see transpiring in organizations today is that by engaging employees to be part of the problem solving, it creates an overall better dynamic for employees and the employer, and ultimately the productivity that we're able to deliver. So as we think about planning for the future, here's really some key points that I would encourage us, those of you that are HR professionals or business leaders, to be keeping in mind. It's really about engaging in conversations at the business level of how much flexibility can your business support. And again, I think this was a point Larissa made, is you likely have different segments of your workforce, or perhaps you have different segments of your workforce, and individual circumstances are going to dominate. Not everyone's situation is the same. So being upfront and having conversations among your leadership of how much can your workplace accommodate individual differences and flexibility where feasible, and then how will you communicate that to employees, right? Because I think employees want to know that the business that they work for is fair, is equitable, and is also appreciative of people having different circumstances and helping employees navigate through that. So, as engaging your leaders where possible in conversations around how will you establish systems and policies and practices to help navigate in this really unusual time is going to be really critical. And the other thing that we found, again, when you've heard me talk about the business continuity management team and the working group that was put together by our organization to help navigate this, one of the things that was really critical was to have participation from different parts of the business, so that you had people with different lenses in the business being able to collaborate and share information about the continuum of our team members, right? In an organization like ours, we're talking about 12,000 employees, and perhaps some of you come from organizations with even more than that, or that are part of a bigger organization. So there's, the overall organizational rules that you have to follow, but understanding what kind of local flexibility you have to navigate through making decisions about this transitional period of time is really important. And wherever possible, having people that represent different areas of the workplace and the business is going to be really important to collaborate and share information as you make decisions about what's next. The other big piece of focus, at least in my organization, has always been putting safety first. And frankly, that's a core value of the organization that I work for, just because of the type of work that we do. But that translated even to how we've dealt with COVID from the beginning. Making sure that you have the appropriate personal protective equipment, whether that's masks and sanitizer at entrances, or how you're going to handle things like the interview process for employees or meetings, making sure that you're thinking through those really practical things related to the day-to-day aspects of getting work done, always through the lens of how can you keep employees safe. To me, that is a winning and critical element of how we continue to navigate this transition. Communicating is absolutely another fundamental tenet, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. You can't do it enough. The biggest thing that we hear from our employees is that they want to understand, they know and appreciate that employers may not have all the answers of what's next, but they certainly want to know what they can expect. So some of the very practical ways that we see that playing out within my organization, again, is we have made a commitment as we've established milestones of when we may transition back to the workplace, to make a commitment to employees that we won't transition back before the date that we have said that we're looking at, and that we will always give them at least a month's notice before we would make a decision. We've also established some other key tenets around communicating, right? Which is, again, we'll give employees plenty of notice so they can handle their personal circumstances, that we're going to be among some of the more cautious organizations in terms of how we're approaching the transition to our organization. But I think employees appreciate that while they may not know what's next, that we've provided a roadmap so that we will provide them regular updates and they will know how we're thinking about things. And we will be transparent around the types of issues that we're dealing with as we navigate transitioning back to the workplace. And going back to what I've said previously, that we'll ask their opinion as well, and we'll get feedback from them on the back end to hear how things are going. I think another piece, again, that weaves nicely with the things Larissa has talked about is really recognizing and being prepared to manage the increased anxiety and fear that employees have as we continue to navigate through what's happening related to COVID is really, really critical. And using this as an opportunity to build resilience and boost morale with employees. And I think the best way to do that, again, is by communicating and by asking for feedback from employees, and also helping them, engaging them and helping to be part of the solution. And then ultimately monitoring the impact of any of the practices that you're putting in place and collecting feedback and providing visibility into the things that are coming. So the other elements that I know were important to cover is how as organizations and leaders within organizations should we be thinking about the laws that are governing our response moving forward as we move into this next phase of transition. And really, there's two that come to mind that I think are worth mentioning, and I'll be completely candid here. I am not a legal HR expert. That is not my area of HR expertise, but I did some research and I wanted to make sure at least I made some key points of the two laws that I think are really probably most critical. And the first is, of course, the American with Disability Act, or the ADA, and employers that are covered by the ADA must consider and, where feasible, make reasonable accommodations for those with physical and mental conditions that are protected under the Americans with Disability Act. So what that means is that, if you're an employer who must abide by the ADA, which I think is most employers, you have an obligation that when employees come forward with a physical or a mental condition, that to make reasonable accommodations where it makes sense. And so what that means, and the way I see this playing out with COVID is, if you have employees that have an anxiety condition, for example, or other mental health conditions that are fearful about coming into back into the workplace or working together, or perhaps they have physical conditions and continue to be concerned about their exposure. If they come forward asking for an accommodation, as a business covered by this, you have an obligation to really understand their condition and think through and where feasible, make accommodations to address those things. There's lots of research out there that you can find, and if this is an issue that you're facing or your organization is facing, I encourage you to work with your HR partners and your legal counsel where possible to really understand the obligations of your business as it relates to this law. I think there's some basic things, right? You have the right as an employer to understand what the protected condition is that the employer is asking for an accommodation around. So if you have that validated through other experiences with this employee, I think a good best practice is to trust that that's the case, right? You don't have to go send them asking for new documentation. You can ask for documentation that reinforces that they actually do have that condition. But it's not necessarily they don't need to have a doctor's note, for example, for the accommodation that's required. It's really up to you as an employer to work with them to help navigate understanding what that accommodation could look like, and then deciding based on your employment practices how you will support that. There's a lot of conversation right now around how does this fit with vaccination? And as an employer, can I require vaccination of my employees? I know that there is lots of chatter about that right now, and people, again, on both ends of the spectrum. I think by and large, what I've seen is most employers saying, we're not going to require it. We're going to encourage vaccination. And of course, employers can require vaccination and employees entering a physical work site. However, accommodations must be considered for those who refuse a vaccine for a religious or disability related purpose. And most importantly, and again, I think Larissa hit on this a bit, but any employee medical information, whether that's about physical or mental conditions, must be kept confidential and in a separate file from the employee's regular employment file, right? As business leaders, as you navigate working through this issue with perhaps HR or others in the organization of best practices, keep those who know to a minimum. Again, there's also the HIPAA rules that people have to be conscious of that you should not be talking about as a best practice, as a legal practice, right? Not talking about employees' health or mental or physical health in general any more than is necessary as you navigate these laws. And then finally, FMLA. That's another law that most employers are covered by. Again, the specifics for your organization, you'll want to navigate with your HR and legal counsel. But employers that are covered under FMLA must provide job protected and unpaid leave for specified family and medical reasons. And so, as COVID has evolved over the last year and a half now, there have been a number of laws within FMLA that have come up. And the one, of course, is the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which has required covered employers to provide eligible employees with basically paid sick leave and expanded family and medical leave for certain COVID-related reasons. And this part, the main part of this law was an act was in place between April 1st of 2020 and through December 31st. As we've moved now past that window, what we're finding is that employers who choose to provide such leave subsequent to that, between now and I think the date that's being talked about out there is September 2021, while they're not necessarily required to cover employees for such leave, that their employees who choose to do that as a best practice may be eligible for tax credits moving forward. So again, just some other things to be aware of relative to kind of the big labor laws that may be effective and practical related to COVID. And then finally, again, and I won't go into this too much because I know Larissa covered it, is really about promoting your EAP services. What I have found is that EAP is critical, not only as a resource for your employees to continue to remind them about, but more importantly, to as employers, to leverage your EAP to help navigate this challenging time again. And a lot of the research that I pulled from here today came directly from the EAP that we work with at my organization. So with that, I thank you for your time and attention. Hope you have found this a bit helpful. I'm going to stop sharing here and go back to the screen. And I'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Nikki, for all that information. Thank you, Larissa, and thank you, Nikki. This was a very comprehensive and informative presentation that feels like it's right on, its finger on the pulse of this ongoing conversation. We are almost at 1 o'clock, so if there are any questions that we can answer, perhaps briefly, in the next few minutes, I'd like to open that up. We're getting some nice comments in the chat. One thing I do want to put in the chat before I forget is the evaluation for this presentation. Just a moment. So the evaluation for this presentation is in the chat. Please take some time to fill that out. It should only take a few minutes. We are privileged to be able to offer these presentations to the community free of charge, and getting honest feedback on our presentations is part of that. We share this information with our funders. The data that we get on these evaluations and that continuation of that funding is part of what allows us to do these presentations free of charge to the community. So please do click the link on that survey in the chat. I'll also send it in an email follow up with the slides from Larissa and Nikki's presentations. Looks like we're just getting a lot of really nice comments in the chat. Very enjoyable, great information, great presentation, very helpful. Glad that you all found it to be helpful and informative. That is our goal. If there are no questions, then I guess we will all go on with our work days. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you again, Larissa and Nikki, for offering your expertise. Thanks for your generosity with your time. Bye.